Good morning. It's time for a technology chat, particularly about a piece of technology that is near and dear to my heart, tablets. I love tablet computing. I have grown accustomed to it so much. It's my daily driver. I know that sounds crazy for some of you who are hardcore PC dependent, and I still use my PC for high processing requirements like rendering and video editing, but when it comes down to daily driving and doing my daily tasks, my favorite interface mechanism is a tablet. So this is part one of a two-part series where we're going to talk about a piece of Retrotech that I really love, and then the next piece of tech that's going to replace it, because it's just time Indeed, it's just time. On its 10-year anniversary, I'm finally retiring a mint condition iPad mini first generation device, and I have to say this is one of my favorite pieces of technology I've ever owned. It still works. But it's time to set it aside for a little while. So today we're going to talk about that. I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to tell you what I'm moving to next in part two of this series, this time on Make and Believe. Alright, so let's start by talking about this beautiful piece of technology. As you can see, that screen is in mint condition. You can use this as a tablet, standalone of course, but I have this beautiful case that it slides into, made by Arteck, and I know a lot of people would find this form factor too small to type on, but for me and my tiny little hands, this is actually great. It's not perfect. A wider keyboard would be preferable, but when I'm on the go, this has served me quite well. I can totally type fluently without any weird glitching or like the keyboard doesn't stick. I have a couple of Bluetooth keyboards where a couple of buttons are just, you know, you gotta hit them twice or hit them hard in order to make sure that you get like an N in a word or whatever. This is not that. This Arteck keyboard is fantastic, and it actually fits the iPad Mini 1 perfectly, since the actual proportion sizes of the iPad Mini have not really changed very drastically over the years. I rather imagine that this will fit other models of the iPad Mini as well, but the Mini 1 is the only one I have had, so it's the only one I can tell you it works perfectly with. And it connects over Bluetooth, which is really nice, so no cables required. Another thing I've done here, which I find extraordinarily important, is I have added magnet chargers. So obviously I've got a USB-B, a micro USB input here on the keyboard, and I've got my Apple adapter here on the Apple, the Lightning port. And I want to be able to use the same cable to charge both devices. So I actually picked up this product, I'll leave a link in the description below, that sells different heads and uses this single cord, and it actually magnet locks onto both of them. So I can go from one to the other with the same cable and charge both devices without carrying around an extra charge pack, which I think is great. Also, that enables you to not overly damage your sockets. If you are plugging and unplugging a cord constantly into devices, that's a point of failure, and it's really a ridiculous point of failure when you're talking about spending a lot of money on a high-end device like a tablet, and like a tablet computing system. So if you can eliminate that, I highly recommend it. Now, Apple has taken measures in recent years. For example, on my iPhone 7, I can no longer use these because it identifies it as not being an Apple certified charging device. And I think that's terrible. Apple, stop trying to own my business. If I want to plug a charger that I didn't buy from you into a device that I own, that I did buy from you, that's just none of your business, Apple. Legitimately, for real. So I do like that I can use that, this particular adapter with this Mini, but I doubt you could use it with any of the newer devices. Like I said, I'm using an iPhone 7, and it won't work with that. So anything newer than that, probably you're out of luck. I do use the touchscreen and the keyboard as my primary interface methods. This is a multi-touch. Even though it's a first generation, it does support multi-touch gesturing. But I also, from time to time, like to use a stylus. The iPad Mini 1 does not work with the Apple Pens, but it does work with a dumb stylus pen, and I've usually got one of these around when I'm traveling anyway, because I like to take actual physical notes. I'm pretty old school, and these padded tips that simulate a finger do work pretty well. It's not perfect. You can't take like really fine detail. You can't draw with this per se, but you can take notes in any of the Notes apps, and that works pretty good. So to run through the specs here on this device pretty quickly, like I said, this is a 10-year-old device. The first generation iPad Mini launched in November of 2012. I'm reviewing this here in the year 2022. This is a 10-year-old device, and I find it amazing that it has held up this well over the years to the test of time. It's a tribute to the build quality of this device, but it lies in direct contrast to Apple's planned obsolescence. The reason I'm moving on past this device is because of Apple and because of app designers who are, kind of kowtowing to Apple's mandates. The device is slowly and surely becoming more and more of a brick every time I try to open up an app and try to use it. That being said, the hardware is fantastic. I love the form factor of this device, and it really has held up so well. This will probably hold up another 10 years and be a functional piece of hardware if the software could keep pace, and I believe that there could be a solution for that in the future. So we'll talk about that here a bit more down the line. But for this device, what it came with, there were up to 32 gigabyte internal storage options. However, mine is only 16 gigs at the time of purchase. That felt like enough for me. Obviously, in 2022, 16 gigabytes of internal storage is not a lot. And not just this Apple device, but any Apple tablet you're going to buy isn't going to have the option for an SD card slot, which is really kind of a drawback. So there is no expansion options to add extra storage to this device. So you're limited to the 16 gigs that you've got. As far as RAM goes, this is about a half a gig. It's 512 megabytes. So, it's got enough processing power to do basic tasks, but it doesn't have a ton of, it's not going to be super fast like a brand new tablet or touchscreen PC. So talking about software, the original operating system that came with the iPad Mini 1 was iOS 6.0.1, which, to be honest, was a pretty decent operating system for its time in 2012 and for several years thereafter. When you consider, like I did, starting on an iPhone 1, iOS has come a really, really long way. Even at 6, I know we're all the way up to like 14 or 15 now these days, but, iOS 6 was a decent operating system for its time. It got things done, and it gave you a wide variety of apps you could use. Some of those apps I can no longer use, and I miss them. I think that's a mistake on Apple's part. That was the original iOS at 6. They continued to update the iOS for the iPad Mini first generation all the way through 2019 if you had the LTE version, the cellular card slot version, which this is. And the most recent update for this version of the iPad Mini first generation was iOS 9.3.6, which actually just added a little bit of security tweaking and kind of broke Cydia tweaks for jailbreaks. So, I wouldn't even recommend installing it if you haven't done so yet. If you've got an an original iPad Mini first generation device that has, like an iOS 8 on it, I would almost recommend staying there. It's not worth the upgrade to go any further. That being said, if you did not have the cellular version, if you just had the Wi-Fi only version of this tablet, the last iOS update was 9.3.5, and that came out in 2016. So if you're looking at the planned lifespan for this device from Apple's perspective, this was launched in November of 2012, and the final iOS update for this device was in 2016. I mean, unless you count the later patch for the LTE systems, but I don't. Apple stopped caring about this device and its operating system updates in 2016. They planned for you to get a new tablet at that point in time, which, look, 10 years later, I guess 6 years later down the line from that, this tablet is still up and running for me just fine. It's beautiful. I love it. And I'm actually sad to retire it. So rounding out the hardware overview of the iPad Mini 1, the battery is a LiPo battery. It's got 4,440 milliamp hours, which is supposed to translate to a 10-hour life. I've actually gotten it to go much longer than that. I mean, I don't do a lot of heavy lifting with this tablet. I mostly nowadays use it as an e-reader. It has a few, you know, high processing power apps still on it that still function, but I don't use this as often because I tend to use a different device when I'm doing that kind of work. So this is mostly an e-reader for me, and I gotta be honest, I've gotten at least 12 hours out of battery life when I'm just doing e-reading. I've taken this on vacation and had a full day of just reading comic books by the pool, and it works great for that effect. I've actually gotten up to a month without charging this device when I just don't do anything with it at all. When it's just sitting on my shelf and it's waiting for you know, a use case scenario to happen. So as far as cameras go, this does have a front and rear-facing camera. The front is a 1.2 megapixel camera, so I mean, you know, look, it works, but it's not your beauty shot camera. So keep that in mind if you're going to try to use this device for anything like a Zoom call. People will see you, but you won't be crystal clear like you are on a brand new HD tablet. The 5 megapixel camera in the back, though, is still pretty decent. I like it. It takes good pictures. It takes relatively decent video when you're just doing things for fun, when you're not doing, you know, production editing or trying to film a movie. It works just fine for basic day-to-day needs. So this is an 8-inch tablet, technically, which is my favorite form factor for a device that I'm going to be carrying around and putting a lot of use in. The display is actually 7.9 inches on the diagonal, so not exactly 8, but pretty close. It is an LED screen. It's got a 1024 by 768 pixel count. It puts out 163 ppi, and the aspect ratio is 4:3. So all of these things work very well for the form factor that you're dealing with here of an 8-inch tablet. Right, so now that we've covered the specs, let's talk a little bit about the apps that I still am able to use on this tablet. Obviously, the basic photos and the camera work just fine. TikTok, surprisingly, which I'm not even on, but I tested out to see if it would work in preparation for this video. Does work. It totally functions, which is just kind of ridiculous considering some of the apps that have been retired from this platform. But TikTok, full swing. Google Drive works just fine, so you can use some cloud storage when you run out of the storage in the non-expandable system platform. Chrome works just fine, as well as Safari. I actually use Chrome more, but that's just my personal preference. Gmail app actually still works just fine, although I don't use it on this device as often as I used to. Google Earth, super high processing power, actually works just fine on the iPad Mini 1. It's kind of crazy. The Notepad Plus is what I use most of the time to take notes. There is obviously the basic Apple Notepad as well, but I like this one. Twitter works totally just fine on this. You want to use this as your tweeting machine with this little keyboard setup, you're good to go. Hoopla is one of my favorite apps, and it's probably the app that I use the most on this device. Hoopla is it's a library app, and if you have a library card at any library in the world, you can get Hoopla. It's a free app. It's available both on Android and on Apple iOS platforms, and you can access anything that's been scanned from any library in the world. I use this a lot for reading comic books. Obviously, they're not the brand new comic books that have just come out that are still in stores, but you can find a really, really wide variety of comic books on Hoopla. In addition to that, you can find magazines, newspapers. I actually was reading Sunset magazine, which is Tiffany's favorite magazine from, I think it was from like the early 1900s, or like when it first came out. It was archived and someone scanned it, and it was available on Hoopla, and that was such a fascinating read. So I use Hoopla more than any other app probably on this device because this is my e-reader. In addition to Hoopla, I also use Google Books, which works just fine here on this tablet. Speaking of high processing power apps, Embed. Embed is a 3D rendering and display program, and I, as a designer, am always wanting to look at my designs off of my PC. I work mostly with Blender on my Linux computer, but then when I want to flip it around and play with it and touch it and, you know, kind of Tony Stark it in my mind into the tweaked version that I really want, when I want to think about a design, I'll open it up in this app called Embed, and I can just really just like that. I can turn it around. I can look at all the angles. I can move things and kind of reposition things and get a real good think in about the design that I'm working with before I go back to Blender and use what I've thought about to inform the design process moving forward. I love Embed. It also allows me to show my my 3D designs that I'm doing on my home big computer when I'm, out and I've only got my tablet, I'm meeting with somebody and a potential investor perhaps, and I want to show them the work. I can pull up Embed, I can pull up that project file, and I can show them the 3D model, and it works really, really well. Google Maps also works just fine. I don't like Apple Maps, but of course Apple Maps does work just as well on this tablet. Google Hangouts, which of course has been retired, still works. So if you need an alternate meeting platform, that works. In that same vein, you've got Zoom and GoToMeeting. Both of those apps still work just fine on this machine. Google Calendar, pretty much the entire Google app suite, the Google stuff still works. The other products like YouTube doesn't work anymore on this computer. And really what it comes down to, it's not just like it used to be that if you have the older version of the app already installed, you could still use that, but they've actually cut that off now. I had to uninstall YouTube because they bricked it. Google, for some reason, decided it would not work anymore. And I don't really understand that kind of decision. I don't understand why I can, on this device, use the browser and go to the browser version of YouTube and watch a video just fine, but I can't use the app. That's just crazy to me. It's a decision I don't comprehend. You've also got MemoPad. Google Meet is pretty much the same as Hangouts. I think it's also been retired. I think they've shifted everything into voice now. I'm not really sure. I don't really use that platform for video chatting very much, so I do have it kind of in a legacy fashion. And I'm hesitant to let apps go because once they're installed on this machine and they're functional, I want to let them run as long as they can before they actually get forcefully discontinued by the app provider. So the next thing, we've got basic calculator systems. You've got Phoenix. Phoenix is an exploit. So that's actually the jailbreak for 9.3.6 iOS, and it works from time to time. Although, to be honest, with the loss of the Cydia store, there's really not a lot to do by jailbreaking your device that you couldn't already do with what's available on the App Store. Essentially, all of your options are very, very limited for a device this old. It's software-wise, it's kind of been phased out. I've got a private browser from back in the day when I was doing a lot of browsing on this. WavePad is a cool audio editor. I've got a VNC viewer because I was just playing with VNC for a while, and I thought it was really neat to be able to take this ancient, old, tiny computer and get onto my Linux PC and do real work. The problem with that here on this machine is that it won't use a mouse. You need to get up to iPad OS, which is iOS 13, before you can have mouse support on a tablet, an Apple tablet. And as I said, this one stops at 9.3.6. So it's not the same to drive a PC using a stylus as it is to use a mouse. So I don't really use VNC Viewer on this machine very much, but it's interesting that it works. Hyperlapse, again, I believe that app has been retired. It is a photography app. One app I really do like is called Quartz Clock, and I actually do use this quite a bit. I'll have this tablet open and set to charge. On our nightstand, we don't have an alarm clock at present, so this Quartz Clock becomes our alarm clock. Let me actually just, well, you know what? Yeah, I don't need to open it. It has an LED function. It has an analog function. It's really slick. If you want to check out a simple clock to use an old device like this for, use Quartz Clock. I like it. And that's about it. The rest here is pretty standard basic stuff. So as far as apps go, you can do some things with the iPad Mini 1 here in 2022, but you can't do other things. And to be honest, I really miss some basic, simple stuff. I'm going to use YouTube again as the example. When I'm not using a bigger, more powerful tablet, when I'm just cooking, I would love to be able to have the YouTube app up and not have to navigate a web browser version of YouTube in order to watch something, to get a recipe going while I'm cooking dinner. Oh, and I almost forgot. The other app that I use most often on my other devices, Google Voice. I have a Google Voice number. I have had a Google Voice number since Google Voice came out. I love it. It no longer works on this device. It's not just like it works and it won't give you notifications. Google Voice, a very simple, bare bones app, won't work on this device anymore. That's just something I cannot wrap my head around. I don't understand it. And especially a device like this, where this has LTE. It doesn't have a SIM in it at the moment, but you could legitimately pop a SIM card in this, and you should be able to use it from Google Voice calling. And yet you can't. So, yeah, I don't really know what to say about that. The planned obsolescence of the software in this system it's extraordinarily frustrating, especially when the hardware is so intact and so functional and crisp. Alright, so before I close this video out, I want to talk a little bit about my dedication to Apple, my lifelong dedication to this company. I have used PCs, I have used Android systems, I have used Apple products, and in my experience, I have found Apple products to be my favorite because of the form factor. They are fantastically well built, and they last a long time. Look, I've had a couple of iPhone 1s, to the point where I've taken these things apart when they broke and repaired them and swapped out batteries and just to keep them alive for a little bit longer. This is an 8 gigabyte phone. It's ridiculous looking at this now and knowing how much I cared about it when it first came out. Yeah, I love the iPhone. This was an innovation that changed the world. There's no doubt about it. So credit where credit is due to Apple for bringing this technology into our lives in the first place. Beyond that, look, I've got an iPhone 6. I use this, I bought this and cracked the screen on day one trying to pop it into its case. I dropped it and I broke it the first day I bought it. I went on to use this phone probably for another 2 years after that day with a cracked screen. That's how much I loved this iPhone. It's beautiful. I just couldn't let it go. Finally, I upgraded to a 7, which I'm still using today. I love this thing. It's just fantastic. This is a fantastic phone. I will use this until the day it becomes completely obsolete. Speaking of obsolescence, in our parkway, we found this phone. This is an iPhone XR. It was just sitting there. I don't know what happened to it. Maybe somebody dropped it. People do sit in our parkway from time to time. Maybe somebody left it and forgot about it. They locked it, the former owner. I reached out to Apple to try to find out who this belonged to. Apple couldn't or wouldn't help me for some reason get this phone back to its owner. Now I know it's got a serial model number. I know that when it was sold at the time of purchase, it was sold to a person who put their user ID on there. I know this because that person locked this phone and is the only person that can unlock this phone. Right now, this phone is a paperweight. This is a brand new iPhone XR that nobody can use. Apple's advice to me, they said they couldn't locate the user even if I provided them the model number, and they really weren't interested when I called them to try to get this phone back to its owner. After that, I said, well, hey, can I unlock it and use it myself then? What they said is to take it to the police. And look, hey, if you believe that the LAPD has either the capability or the interest in returning this phone to its user, well, I'll tell you what, I'd love to play poker with you sometime, and I've got some options in a couple of bridges in New York City that you might be interested in looking at. Seriously, that's ridiculous. So that's absolute piece of junk, and now, because of the, essentially the lack of capability of a perfectly functional, mint condition, perfect vintage Retrotech tablet, I gotta retire it, I gotta set it on the shelf. In addition to that, I actually have, see over there, a Mac, an iMac. I think it's from 2015. It's pretty ancient. That was also pretty much obsolete. Apple stopped giving operating system updates for it. Fortunately, with that PC, I was able to sideload Ubuntu on there, and now I'm running Ubuntu 20 on this computer, and it is humming like it was brand new. This is a fantastic machine. I use this for writing, I use it for video editing, I use it for some 3D design occasionally. It's a great machine. I really love it, and I think it'll last into the foreseeable future now that I have freed it from Apple's software restriction limitations. So, that being said, I want to make it clear. I am an Apple fan. I am a long-time Apple fan. Heck, let me pop a little mirror out here. I am filming this right now on my favorite tablet, which is a 4th generation iPad. That's how much I love Apple. I am filming this video on an iPad right now. But look, here's the deal. Apple has planned all of these devices to be obsolete. obsolete. Even my iPhone 7, which is still getting the most recent updates, one day will go. The iPad I'm filming this on now, which is still getting the most recent updates, will be planned for retirement soon. I don't think I get another update on either one of these devices after iOS 15, which was recently released and is being updated now. So that's it. That's where they die. Not because they're dead, not because they're broken like these other phones, not because they have a cracked screen, not because someone lost it and locked it, but because the company that made it decided they were obsolete at this point in time. And the app makers are required to follow suit. There's really no reason that Google Voice or YouTube won't work on this old tablet. They're low processing power requirements for both of those apps, especially Google Voice. There's no reason that shouldn't work on that iPad mini one. But it doesn't. It's not even offered in the App Store anymore. So I gotta hand it to you, Apple. Your planned obsolescence strategy, it worked even better than you can possibly imagine, because you know what, Apple? You've planned yourself to be obsolete in my life. When I move forward with my next purchase, I'm not buying an Apple product. And it's primarily because I know that even if I keep it in mint condition for 10 years, even if I keep the battery completely perfectly cycled so that it maintains its lifespan a decade down the line, you will eventually make the machine I purchased obsolete. You'll make it so that it can't do what it was originally designed to do, and you'll do it for a financial profit interest to get me to buy a new product from you. And I'm done with that loop. I'm done with that cycle. You've gotten enough of my money. I'm breaking the chain, Apple. So my next product is not going to be an Apple product. It's going to be a product that I can maintain indefinitely, that will work indefinitely as long as I keep that hardware functional and in good shape. It's also going to be something that I don't have to rely on flash memory that's fused into a product that is very difficult and to take apart. I like to be able to take my devices apart. Obviously. When they break, I like to fix them if I can myself. Obviously. So my next purchase is going to be one of those types of products as well. It's also going to have expandable memory storage so that I don't have to rely on whatever gigabyte flash memory is installed in the device. So I'm looking forward to part 2 of this series, where I get to unveil to you all my new tablet of choice and how amazing that machine is and why it's so much better than anything in the entire Apple ecosystem, including cutting-edge iPads today. So stay tuned. I'll see you next time, and we'll talk about that then on Make and Believe.